one thing we wanted to talk about today was Windows 365. And this is a big change for a lot of folks who've perhaps been planning various different strategies for how they're going to roll out modern devices or adopt VDI and so on. What do you think of Windows 365, Paul?
So I really like the way Microsoft is positioning this as your PC in the cloud. If you think of all of the other things that have gone to the cloud, your desk phone has or at least could go to the cloud. Your DVD player and VCR have gone to the cloud. There are all these other everyday services that have gone to the cloud. And I think what Microsoft has done by using that phrase makes it really clear to people that you can have this rich PC experience even if you don't have or want to have a PC. They're not playing it up quite that way because most of the advertising or marketing materials around Windows 365 show people using some kind of Windows device to get to their Windows 365 virtual device, which seems a little weird, right? I mean, if you have a PC, why wouldn't you just use it? But I mean, to me, the real potential is you can have the same consistent environment everywhere you go, no matter where you are, no matter what device you're using to access it. And so, of course, organizations that have already deployed VDI and have been doing this for years and years are going to look at this and go, okay, so what? We've had this already. But there are a lot of people who have never approached it from that standpoint of, you mean instead of having to buy and provision and maintain and support and keep a company-provided PC for every individual employee, I can put all that stuff in the cloud and say, right, you can buy an iPad or an Android tablet or a 100-pound laptop from Tesco. You can buy whatever device you want as the window to get to what you need to do for work, and we'll provide a good experience, and it's on you to handle the gateway device. I think that's going to be very attractive to a lot of organizations that have resisted VDI so far because VDI, when you talk about it, sounds really scary and complicated. This just sounds like, it's Windows in the cloud. It's friendly.
It does make it an interesting proposition as well. If you are like a small business and there's two sides to Windows 365 and there's a simple self-sign-up subscription where if you've got a Microsoft 365 business tenant, you can sign up for Windows 365 and buy yourself a Windows PC that you might use on your tablet. So maybe you've got an Android tablet or you've got an iPad and you've realised you need to buy some finance package and it's not iPad compatible, the one you need or whatever software it is. So it opens the door to that as well from a now I can just subscribe to this perspective and I've got a PC available, I don't need to do anything. But there's an area where it almost sort of flies in the face of messaging over the years from Microsoft, where what I've heard from, say, vendors like Citrix has been almost like a compete for Microsoft 365 on mobile devices. So Microsoft perhaps saying, if you've got an iPad, then you can access all the Office apps, no problem at all. You can access all your documents from wherever you are. Same on an Android device or a mobile phone, and we've got all the right controls in that. It doesn't actually matter what device you've got. We're a cloud-first, mobile-first company. Whereas Citrix have been very much like we've actually got the receiver on a mobile device saying, well, actually, maybe you want the full desktop Office apps on something that we provide as VDI, and look, we can get all the apps onto any device you want, which has been a different strategy. I don't know what you think.
So it's interesting that you say that because, in the bad old days, all the business units at Microsoft were sort of in this hyper-competitive zero-sum game that Microsoft leadership actively encouraged. So, for example, a win for the Exchange ActiveSync team was a loss for the Windows Mobile team. Or if Office needed to do something for their competitive reasons and it was bad for Exchange for them to release ahead of Exchange Server, for example, well, they didn't care. They just did it. And I'm simplifying somewhat, but at that point in time, it was totally okay for business units at Microsoft to backstab or front stab each other.
Yeah.
And under Satya Nadella's leadership, that has not been okay, and the business units tend to not do it very much. except now, right? So the Office 365, or let's back up, right? The Microsoft 365 and Dynamics 365 crowd, along to a lesser extent with the Azure crowd, are saying, you bring whatever device you want, and we'll give you a consistent experience with full access to the workloads and full fidelity. If you want to buy a Mac, great, buy a Mac. You can still run Office. If you have a 10-inch Android tablet, you get a rich Office experience. If you have a browser, we don't care. And by its nature, I mean, that attitude is extremely hostile toward Windows Desktop. Because what they're saying is they're cutting that tie between that Microsoft has historically had, where Microsoft products and services work better on Microsoft's operating system. And I'm not saying that's no longer the case, but at least the sort of impression that I get is that the Office system people are frantically hacking with an axe at the rope that ties those two together, and say, look, if you want to use devices, if you want to use a Google Chromebook to access Microsoft Office 365, we're completely cool with that. We don't even mind. You have to imagine that the Windows division is not in love with that. But that's become pervasive at Microsoft, even to the development platform. You can run Visual Studio Code on platforms that Microsoft fully supports and contributes to Linux. I mean,
this is the thing. There's certainly a perception, and I think the perception is overly taken on board by Microsoft that people don't want or like Windows anymore. So, I saw a thread from a CIO or CTO on Twitter the other day, and they were saying, what's the tool people are using these days instead of Slack? It seems expensive unless people I know are using it. And then all the replies, for the best part, apart from a couple of open source products, and one suggestion of Zoom might have this equivalent Slacky style feature soon, Teams. And then, the response back from this person saying, oh, that's not trendy. No startups want to use Teams or Microsoft. Microsoft are seen as this old world company. But I refrained entirely from replying because what's the point, right? But I don't. That's not a consistent view across all developers. It's not a consistent view across all startups, and it's certainly not a pervasive view outside in the real world. There was a view, perhaps for Microsofty type folks, that we had some horrible storm coming, where nobody would want a PC anymore. The idea of a PC was gone, out the window. People would only want tablets, and they would only want iPads. And then on the tooling point of view, people would not want Office. People would not want thick apps. Everybody who is coming into the workforce now they'd all want Google. And neither of those things are true, and they've never came to pass either. There's not a Microsoft with a $sign in the middle, poster on young developers' walls these days.
Right. If one of the things that Windows 365 helps Microsoft do is peel itself a little bit away from being tied to hardware OEMs. Because now it means you can still get a really, if I may say this, rich and flavorful, high-quality, managed Windows experience without having a Windows device. So, and you know this very well from decades of supporting family members. If you go to the average consumer outlet anywhere in the Western Hemisphere and you buy an average consumer PC, it is going to be loaded up with so much crap. It's going to have old drivers or bad drivers. It's going to have, pick your bad antivirus solution. It's going to have McAfee or some other Norton, some other nagging subscriptionware. It's a terrible experience for people. And Microsoft is now saying, look, if you want to get all the good things about Windows, the software compatibility, and the breadth of the ecosystem, and for companies, the ability to use the management tools. It's one thing that I think has been underplayed in these discussions is that Windows 365 devices, by their nature, are manageable, or they are managed. So when you get them and install them right from the get-go, they're already integrated with and supported by Microsoft Endpoint Manager if you get the Enterprise Edition.
So this,
and that means that the minute you deploy it, it's already under management. You don't have to do anything to grab that device and bring it into the management fold the way that you would with buying an external device and having to manage it using Autopilot.
I mean, there's a bit of that there, though, isn't there? Where there's some key prerequisites that people have to do at the moment, but this seems tied to Azure Virtual Desktop as well, where Azure Virtual Desktop got a preview for Azure AD joined and Intune managed virtual desktops, and that's in a preview at the moment. So for the first release of Windows 365, then it's a hybrid Azure AD joined model, which means, and they've wrapped this into Intune by Endpoint Manager quite well, where you've got to have a virtual network in Azure that your machines connect to, and that network in Azure is then going to either have maybe your domain AD is extended there, or you'll need to create a line of sight capability, to use the term that is often used in AVD and Autopilot. You need to have that line of sight to a domain controller to facilitate first login and so on, and subsequent login after that. But the other side to that is, most of the time, it's not just Office delivered in the cloud that people want with VDI. The reason why I see a lot of AVD deployments is because there are applications that need low latency access to the file store or database or whatever middleware location that it is that they're interacting with, and a bit like doing an EV migration, where you want the agent that's going to pull the data off close to EV rather than 100 miles away, or down 15 hops, and over the course of rolling out machines to give people a modern experience, some organisations have said, well, we've got these legacy apps, we need AVD to get close to those. As we move those to the infrastructure to Azure, AVD is going to mean that we're close to that app that we can't get rid of yet. And that's been a key driver for it, which I think mitigates slightly that hybrid Azure AD join requirement on day one. But it's something you need to be aware of if you're thinking, this is going to be my solution come 2nd of August to several problems for several people at least. So there's that part to bear in mind. But what have you been, have you been looking at this in a AVD versus Windows 365's aspect?
Yeah, I've spent some time sort of trying to wrap my hand and head around the problem and figure out, okay, how do these two match up?
Yeah.
And I guess the way that I think about it is that Windows 365 is designed around, or intended to be, a simple, and if I say appliance-like, I don't mean to necessarily apply that there's a Windows 365 appliance you put in your branch office or whatever. But Microsoft intends it to be a relatively low touch, relatively low footprint, relatively low admin workload, and relatively low skill deployment option. AVD, on the other hand, very, very flexible. Right?
Yeah.
In general, anytime you see Azure in the name of a service, you may assume that you can very quickly get yourself into a lot of trouble if you don't understand what you're doing with it, because it will be more complicated than it first appears. And I think that's probably true of AVD.
Yeah.
Because Windows 365, the big selling point is that Microsoft manages the environment.
Yeah, it's like a SaaS
Azure
product.
Virtual Desktop. Right. Azure Virtual Desktop, you get all the ingredients to manage it, and then you have to manage it. You have to manage the networking, and you have to manage the underlying VMs and where the desktops are stored and so on. Microsoft is trying to shield customers from a lot of that complexity in Windows 365. And so if I may be permitted to use the analogy of an iPhone versus an Android device, Android devices tend to be much more flexible, much more configurable. There are a lot of other things that you can do with them. You can sideload applications, for example. But at the same time, there are also a lot of complexities or weird things that you can make. There are weird troubles that you can bring on yourself that iPhone users never have to deal with.
Yeah.
So there's the balance between flexibility and it just works ability, to coin a phrase. The Windows 365 focus is clearly on the it just works ability, which that just means there'd be some things that you can't do. One example that leaped out at me right when I first saw Windows 365, it's Windows 10 or eventually Windows 11 Enterprise, period. If you need to run Windows Server, for example, as a desktop, as you might,
Yeah.
You have to do that with AVD.
And scenarios like multi-user machines. But you're right, it's a platform as a service versus software as a service, and the differences between those. And there's a cost to the business of managing this stuff that is avoided. It also opens up opportunities, for folks who Microsoft 365 and endpoint manager experts, but not VDI experts as well. But it's a route to learn about it as well, and get into understanding that space. But you won't be an expert in AWV after a year of managing Windows 365, for sure.
Oh, heavens
no.
One thing that I think is really interesting that Microsoft is, I don't think they've emphasized this a lot in their early promotional materials, but for first-line workers, Windows 365 is a terrific solution, because there are a lot of first-line worker positions or roles that are seasonal, might not quite be the right word, but intermittent. Some of them are seasonal in the sense that they're tied to the seasonal calendar, but this gives enterprises a huge amount of flexibility to give people computing resources on demand in a way that they haven't had before. If I have to temporarily hire 500 people to spin up a new facility, for example, I can give them all Windows 365 managed PCs so they can be full participants in whatever work there is to be done.
That's an excellent point. And I think it's not just first line workers as well, but on some AVD projects, some of the benefit that they've had of preparing in advance, a long time in advance, sometimes people are spinning this up very, very, very quickly. But when they're really sort of trying to think strategically, then one aspect of that might be being able to scale up as they need it. But if you don't, if you suddenly have that requirement where your business is exploding in size, or you are going to recruit 500 people to cover the summer, and you don't have capabilities of that, it could be office workers effectively working remotely, then being able to do that, to either cover that gap until you built infrastructure or sent devices out, means that if somebody came to you and said, I need to employ, we're going to have 500 new starters over the next 2 weeks, the recruitment process, it's all been hush-hush, it's happening now, we're going to bring them on board, we need to be able to provide the machines or access, and then your biggest problem is, well, I can't break all of our security and compliance ruling here. I can't allow them to just install Teams on their personal device.
Right.
You've got that moment where you can just buy this in and say, we can do it, but there's a cost to it. But we can do this, yes. And then your temporary problem is solved. So that's an interesting thing that perhaps hasn't been mentioned so much in some of these comparisons, that you highlight on that immediate scaling, which has always been the benefit of the cloud, but has been quite hard to realise sometimes. So Windows 365 looks super interesting then. So I think we're going to have to, as soon as we can, have a lot of articles on this on the site. So stay tuned for more of those. But Windows 365 gets a big thumbs up from you, Paul.
I'm excited about the possibilities. The one thing I'm dearly hoping is that it does not become available for self-service purchase, because I'm still on my hobby horse about that whole capability.
So, to wrap up this section, one thing from the message center is that is coming, and we'll put a link to this on how, if you want to, you can disable people from doing that as well.
You want to disable people from doing that if you don't let your employees go out and buy their own PCs right now with the company credit card, I don't see any reason why you would start allowing them to do it virtually either.